God's desire is that every person would reach their full potential. This growth does not happen when we are at ease. Growth requires grit. Growth requires tenacity. We find out who we truly are in the wilderness of life. We trust most fully when in a tough spot, when our faith is tested. But it is there when we realize He is with us every step of the way.
As many have pointed out, the Bible begins in a garden, the Garden of Eden. And it ends in a city, the New Jerusalem, when God has made everything new. But it's what happens in between, in those pages in between, that represents so much of our lives that we want to spend some time, because it's in the in-between where we often find ourselves in that dry and desert territory that the Hebrew language calls the midbar. That's the Hebrew word for it, which means wilderness. And it's in the wilderness, as you look at Scripture, where we find people are stretched. That's where faith is tested. That's where character is shaped. And that's where trust in God is formed or reformed. You see, the wilderness is a place of preparation, but it's also a place of revelation, seeing God, seeing what God wants us to see. And because it can be a difficult place, because it can also be a place of suffering, of uncertainty, then we find this is true, that the wilderness experience is often painful. It's often painful. Several years ago, up in Wyoming at the Bridger Wilderness area, they decided we want to hear from our people. We want to hear from our hikers and campers. And so they set up a system of having a comment card and comment box, and people could submit comments. Well, you know what that means, right? Anytime you have a comment box, really what comment means is complaint, right? Complaint box. Sometimes we joke about the Welcome Center with Kevin and Katie is like the complaint station. You know, if you have a complaint, go to. That's not what it's for, okay? So don't do that. But the wilderness area up there, I thought, we want to hear from the people. And so they set up this system. And here are some of the complaints or the comments that came in, as it is reported, allegedly. This one says, trails need to be wider so people can walk while holding hands. Isn't that romantic? That's so sweet. Another one said, trails need to be reconstructed. Please avoid building trails that go uphill. Someone else said, too many bugs and spiders and spider webs. Please spray the wilderness to get rid of these annoying pests. Someone else commented that chairlifts need to be installed so that we can get to wonderful views without having to hike there. On someone's card, they said the coyotes made too much noise last night, kept me awake. Please eradicate these annoying animals. Speaking of animals, someone else commented that a deer came into their camp and stole their jar of pickles. Is there any way that they can get reimbursed? Must be really expensive pickles. Someone said reflectors need to be placed on the trees every 50 feet or so people can hike at night using a flashlight. And finally, someone just said, too many rocks in the mountains. Just a great example of our mindset so often. We expect the wilderness, like everything else, to be easy. Why do we do that? Why would we expect to go hiking in the wilderness and there to be no bugs, that it wouldn't go uphill, that it wouldn't be difficult at times? I mean, look at that word wilderness. It has the word wild in it. The wilderness is wild. It is uncertain. It is uncomfortable. It is unsettling. It's often a place where we struggle, even suffer at times. When you're in the wilderness, everything you think you know, everything that is familiar, everything that is comfortable is turned on its head. Life is difficult there in the wilderness. Chad Bird says this, the wilderness is where we, with painful frequency, sojourn in this life. When surrounding us are the hot desert sands of anxiety and fear, where we see no green grass of joy, but lots of sharp rocks of grief, where day after day we spy no oasis of hope, but only a horizon of despair. The wilderness, while it can be difficult, it can be painful, it is not fun, it can be and will be formative if you allow God to do what God does. Some of you know what life is like in the wilderness. Some of you are there right now, probably not at your choosing. Maybe because someone else has made some choices, or maybe because circumstances in life have thrust you into the wilderness, and you look around and you feel those things we just read in that quote. You feel the anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty. You're going through a time of struggle and stress, of pain, and you're wondering, how long is it going to last? How do you make your way out of this wilderness? How do you come up for air? Maybe that's where you are right now. Some of you may be coming out of the wilderness, and you are thankful. You can see some hope, you can see some light, but you're also exhausted. You're exhausted physically, emotionally, maybe spiritually. I got to tell you, a crowd this size, I can almost guarantee that for some of us, you're about to step into the wilderness. Maybe you don't even know it's coming. Maybe you anticipate it a little bit because things are sort of taking shape and you're worried about the future. Or maybe it's just going to completely catch you off guard. Maybe the death of a loved one, or a health crisis in your life or your family's life, or a job situation or financial situation or a relational family situation. You're going to be pushed into the wilderness where life doesn't make sense, where you have left the familiar, where life is hard. I think it's good for us to acknowledge that, to recognize that. And that's what we're doing. We're starting a new 6-week series today called The Wilderness. That's where God reveals us. And that's often the painful part, revealing things about us that we need to know and to see. But he doesn't leave us there in the wilderness, exposed, vulnerable. Yes, he reveals things to us, but he also remakes us in the wilderness. We're going to take a little break in this series next week for Commission Sunday. You saw the video just a few moments ago. Again, thank you so much for your participation, for your sacrifice, and allowing God to use this church to expand the borders of his kingdom, to make disciples of so many nations. So thank you for that. But then after Commission Sunday, we'll go back into the wilderness and we'll spend a few weeks there together. And my hope is that we can learn from the Israelites as they were brought out of Egypt and they spent a lot of time in the wilderness. Life was not easy for them there. You say, well, but it was their own fault. Sometimes it's our own fault when we're in the wilderness, isn't it? Sometimes it's not circumstances, it's not other people's choices, it's our choices. Whatever the case, we find ourselves in the wilderness, they found themselves there, and they acted like we act so many times. Yes, confused, yes, hurting, but also they turn that and they become self-reliant and stubborn. They no longer trust God. And how many times do we do the same thing? And so if we can look at their interactions with themselves, with the world around them, with God, maybe we can learn some lessons. Maybe we can learn some lessons not the hard way that will help us as we navigate the wilderness experience. We have our Discovery Bible Study bookmarks. The physical copies are out in the lobby. We have it on their website as well. Just a great resource for your own personal study to keep up with the text, the biblical text throughout the series. But even more than that, it's a great tool to use to open up the Bible with others, to just look at some Bible verses, ask some very directed but important questions about God, about life, about faith, about the text. And so I just encourage you to use that as a resource. So as we jump into this story about the Israelites leaving Egypt, I think it's important for us, first of all, to back up and get some context. The Old Testament book of Genesis tells us about a godly man, a Jewish man, an Israelite man named Joseph, who ends up in Egypt. If you know Joseph's story, you know that there were several things that sort of happened, other people's choices, that put him in Egypt. Once in Egypt, God was with him, brought him up, and he became a person of influence. He worked alongside Pharaoh. He wasn't Egyptian, and yet he had a place and a position of influence in Egypt. There was a huge famine in the land. And that prompted Joseph to enable his family to leave their home and to move to Egypt so he could take care of them during this famine. The famine lasted for quite some time. It was quite severe. And as the family grew and as more Israelites began to come into Egypt and that number began to grow, there were more and more Jewish people there in Egypt. Well, Pharaoh came and went. There was a new Pharaoh, and he didn't like Joseph. And he didn't honor the previous Pharaoh's system of governance. And he looks around and he sees all these Israelites in his land, and he says, that could be trouble. And so he enslaves the Israelites. They become the workers. They become the ones who build things for Pharaoh. And that begins what we know as the Egyptian slavery of Israel. For over 400 years, God's chosen people, covenant people, are enslaved in Egypt. And finally the day comes, through God's providence, to bring them out of Egypt, to deliver them to the land of promise, Canaan. It's the day for Moses, God's leader, God's servant, to lead the Exodus. And if you know the story, you know there were plagues, the 10 plagues on Pharaoh and Egypt. And finally Pharaoh relents and he lets the people go, sort of. And that's where we pick up our story. For the Israelites, we often associate their time in the wilderness, the 40 years, as a direct result of their rebellion against God, and Scripture indicates that. But what you may not realize or have put together is that their journey actually begins in the wilderness, in the desert. And so we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. And I would add that they thought they were ready for battle. But God knew they weren't really ready. He knew that they were actually pretty frail and fragile. Like a runner who starts a marathon, enthusiastic, ready to go the whole distance, but then faces that first moment of distress, that stitch in the side, that muscle starting to get sore, and then he or she says, I'm done. No more of that. God knows that's what the Israelites will do. The first sign of distress, the first opposition they face, they're going to say, I'm done. And they're going to turn back. He knew they would turn around. After all, they were slaves. They weren't warriors. They made bricks and built structures. They didn't wield swords and fight battles. God knew it, and he was ready to lead them and take care of them. And where did he lead them? The text tells us. He led them on the long way. That is not just an inconsequential, insignificant detail. He led them on the long way. Now, scholars have looked at the Exodus, and they've decided that there were probably about 3 routes that the Israelites could have taken out of Egypt. And these 3 routes represent, I think, 3 different sets of challenges. We know about one of them because God says, I didn't take them on the route towards the Philistines. That on the map would be the northern route. I think that's blue. I can't really tell from here. Yeah, that's blue. So the northern route that would go through the Philistine country. It's much shorter, isn't it? It's much shorter than the red route. But God knew something about them. He knew that if they faced the Philistines, that they would be discouraged and that they would turn around. Scholars have also said there's probably a central route in there somewhere that was also shorter, but the terrain made it a challenge, and they've said there may have been some Egyptian outposts there. So again, the potential for opposition. And then there's the southern route, the long way, that goes way down beside the Red Sea. And that's the route that God chose to take his people on, the long way. Incidentally, I used AI to make this image because I really wanted you to see visually. And we don't know exactly where they went, and we don't know exactly the routes, but visually it could have been something like that. And so when it came time to get this visually done, I could not get AI to put the red route through the Red Sea. I couldn't get it to cross the blue anywhere. It took 6 iterations, and I ran out of my free version, It's like artificial intelligence could not wrap its mind around, you can't walk through water. But this is God. God took them through the water. So actually, I had to do that part by hand, so don't look too closely at that. But I want you to see visually the long way. That's where God led his people. And I think there's so many lessons to learn from just that very detail, that God took them on the long way. So let's talk about some of those lessons. First of all, life doesn't always take the path we expect, does it? You probably know that's true. However old you are, and it probably doesn't even matter, you've probably looked back at your life and compared the story of what you thought your life would be to the reality of what your life is. And there's probably some gaps there, right? Your life, if you're like most of us, probably hasn't gone exactly like you had planned or maybe hoped, or you had these goals and these dreams or these ideas, these visions of what life would be like, and now you look at your life and you go, well, it's not quite, or you may look at it and go, man, it's not even close to what I thought. That's the nature of life, isn't it? Because we don't always have control. And let's be honest, that guy or that girl making those decisions back then, how wise was that person? And so life has a way of taking twists and turns, doesn't it? That's the nature of life. It doesn't always go as planned. That's certainly what happened with the Israelites. This was all new for them. For over 400 years, they had been at home. Now, wasn't life difficult there in Egypt? Yes, but it was familiar. And now all of a sudden, they are thrust out of the familiar, out of their comfort zone. As uncomfortable as it was, out of that, and now they're out exposed in the desert, in the unknown, the uncertainty. They don't know what's next. They don't know where they're going. Life doesn't always go like we expect. And don't you know, Israelites, that there were those people, those critics, those backseat drivers that couldn't wait to say, hey, wait a second, we shouldn't go this way. You know there's a shorter way, Moses. You know you have us on the long way. In fact, look at verse 10 of chapter 14. As Pharaoh approached, because Pharaoh, remember I said sort of let them go? He changed his mind. He sends his armies to pursue them. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. That's what life feels like in the wilderness, doesn't it? When you're in the desert, you feel like you're going to die. Sometimes you want to die. You think that might be better than the reality of what's coming. And so already they are backseat driving. Some of you know what that's like. You're literally driving your car. Maybe you're taking people somewhere. And maybe you're using your map on your car or on your phone, and you're just following the directions, but you have that person who has a better way, right? Hey, I know a shortcut. Hey, you shouldn't go that way, go this way. You know what that's like to have the backseat driver. And that's what happens here. You see, our path through life, it doesn't always go in a straight line. It doesn't always take the shortest route. You want to go one way, but something happened, something unexpected. And now you're going a different way. And maybe you don't even know where you're going. God has a reason. God had a reason for taking the Israelites the long way, didn't he? And we get the privilege to see that reason. Because in our own lives, we don't always know. In fact, most often, we don't see the reason. Certainly in the moment. Maybe sometimes we can look back and see it. And so as we look back at this story, we get the reason. We're told why. God knows them. God knows things about them that they probably don't realize about themselves. Remember the text said that they were ready for battle? God knew they weren't ready for battle. God knew that if they faced the Philistines, they would be terrified, and they would give up, and they would go back. So God had a reason for taking them on the long way. He wasn't curious about how they would act, what they would do. He knew because he was already there. Remember, as Scripture says, God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. You see, he's on a different level. And even just to say that sounds so like, of course he is. But we forget that because we think our ways are God's ways. God, I know a shortcut. God, why are you making us go the long way here? God, why are you putting me in this difficult situation? God, if you would just do this or that, if you would just change this circumstance, this situation, my life would be so much easier. And sometimes God walks with us on the long way, not because it's the easy way, but because it's his way. Which leads us to the second lesson I think we can learn. That is that we need patience. Patience and perseverance are needed to survive the wilderness. We have to learn to be patient. That's hard for many of us. I know many of you like to listen to audiobooks or podcasts, maybe in the car, maybe on your headphones when you're working out or doing yard work or housework or whatever. And I don't know, if you're like me, I never listen to those on just normal speed. Does anyone else? I suspect probably everyone else. I'm not strange, right? Everyone else speeds those up, like 1.3 or 1.5, right? Some of you go for 2. That's a little too fast for me. I don't want Alvin and the Chipmunks reading my book to me. But I'll go about 1.5. That's about max for me. Why do we do that? Why don't we just listen to it at the normal speed? Because we're in a hurry. We got to tear through that book or that podcast because we got to play the next one. We got things to do. We're always in a hurry. We don't want to be patient. We despise waiting. Here's what I think we all know about the wilderness, but we don't like it. And that is, you can't fast forward through the wilderness. You can't put it on 1.5 speed. Sometimes you just have to take the journey, the long way. I wonder if Jesus, when he went to the wilderness, I wonder if he went there and he was given the choice, Jesus, you're going to fast, you're going to do without food, and you're going to be tempted by Satan. Now, would you like to do that for maybe 8 hours? Or would you like to do that for 40 days? I mean, if I was answering that question, I'd be like, is there a third option? Like, just if I have to do it just for a few minutes? Just, maybe 15 minutes? Jesus did that for 40 days. That's the long way. That's the way we don't like. It takes patience and perseverance. Why? Why does God take Israel on the long way? Because deliverance takes time, doesn't it? Exodus is a journey. You don't develop discernment overnight. It often takes time for you to be placed into a different vantage point, to see yourself, to see others, to see your life, to see the world, to see God from a different perspective. To get outside of yourself long enough to see that there's a world outside of you and what you think. You see, discernment takes time. You don't move from self-reliance to complete dependence on God in just a moment. That kind of faith requires walking step by step with God. And sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, but we continue to step through the rugged terrain of the wilderness because we know God is with us and he's doing something in us. You don't experience true deliverance from being enslaved to sin or addiction or trauma in just one step. There's always a process, often a painful process, of God revealing to you what is on the inside of you. But he doesn't just reveal it. As I said earlier, he begins to change you, transform you from the inside out. And just like your ways are not God's ways and your thoughts are not God's thoughts, your timetable is not always God's timetable. Peter reminds us in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, that God operates on a completely different economy of time. That he's not restrained by our temporal restrictions and limitations. That to him 1,000 years and a day are basically the same. And to us, that just sounds completely foreign. On March 18th of last year, 2 NASA astronauts who'd been in orbit for 9 months splashed down in the calm waters off the coast of the panhandle of Florida. But their 9-month journey was anything but calm and predictable. Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore blasted off from Earth in June of 2024, and they headed toward the International Space Station, and they were on a test flight for a new Boeing spacecraft called the Starliner. And the idea was that if this works well, it could take astronauts back and forth into orbit. But once they got there, there was something wrong with the propulsion part of the Starliner. And so NASA decided to send the spacecraft back without the crew, which meant that these 2 astronauts had to stay on the space station. They were stuck. They couldn't just call an Uber. I guess there's not Ubers in outer space. I don't know. So they were stuck there. What should have been an 8-day trip turned into a 9-month ordeal. I guess they had lots of food. I don't know. They were interviewed about their feelings about getting stuck there. Wilmore said this. He said, "It's been trying at times. It's been hard, no doubt. But stranded? No. Stuck? No. Abandoned? No." Miss Williams added, "You get a little bit more time to enjoy the view out the window." That's pretty good. A little more time to enjoy this unique view we have that not many people have. When you feel stranded, when you feel stuck, when you feel abandoned by God, that's what the wilderness does, doesn't it? How many times have you gone through a difficult time and prayed, "God, where are you? Help me, deliver me, save me, rescue me"? When you feel that way, I would encourage you to take a breath. Take in a deep breath and open your eyes and take another look at the view that you have, the unique view that maybe few others have, maybe no one else, a view that God wants you to have so that you can see what he wants you to see. Which leads us to the third lesson I think we can learn, and that is that the long way develops trust, and it demands trust. That's what the wilderness is really about. The Israelites discovered what we need to learn. The wilderness begins when certainty ends. And when things aren't certain, when they're not familiar, when they're not comfortable, we have a decision to make. Who are we going to trust? For so long, we trust ourselves. But when everything is different, when I no longer have control and I finally realize it, who am I going to trust? For the Israelites, they decided they wanted to trust themselves. They did not trust God. "God, we told you." Moses, "We told you. We don't want to leave. Why would you make us leave Egypt?" "Yeah, but look at your life in Egypt. That's not the life that God wants for you." "Yeah, but it's familiar. And on some level, it's comfortable. We know what to expect." Now suddenly, they find themselves exposed, vulnerable, out in the desert, out in the wilderness, unforeseen obstacles and challenges. Their situation seemed hopeless. But I want you to listen to what Moses tells them. Moses has a message for them. It's not from Moses, it's from God. And his words pierce right through their anxiety, right through their fear. I believe his message is not only meant to reassure them, but it's meant to challenge them, invite them, call them into something more than trusting themselves, but trusting God. Chapter 13, verse 20, he reminds them that God is with them. After leaving Sukkoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. What is Moses telling them? God is with you. God doesn't leave you alone in the desert. God does not leave you alone in your desert. You're not stranded. You're not stuck. You're not abandoned. God does not desert you in the desert. For the Israelites, they had this column of smoke, this cloud by day, this column of fire by night. They could visually, literally see the symbolic presence of God, a daily reminder. But when they weren't looking forward, where were they looking? Back. And what did they see behind them? They saw Pharaoh. They saw the enemy. They saw the opposition, and they were afraid. Chapter 14, verse 13, Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you'll see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord," listen to this, "the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." What the Israelites could see, their vision, is a constant theme throughout this text. Think about what they could see. All around them was the desert. That's pretty hopeless. In front of them was the Red Sea. What are they going to do with that? And behind them was the approaching army of the enemy closing in. And Moses wants them to see something else. He wants them to see not through their physical eyes, but through the eyes of faith. And he says, you see these Egyptians, you're never going to see them again. As a sign of God's presence and provision for you, get a good look now, because they're going to be gone and you won't see them again. And what happens when they miraculously cross the Red Sea? Do you remember this little detail as they look around? They actually do see the Egyptian armies. But do you remember what they see? Chapter 14, verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. That's what it's about. Trust in him. That's going to be a constant theme throughout this series, because that's what the wilderness is all about. Are you going to trust God? Are you going to let go of control? You're trusting someone. Who is it? Many of us trust ourselves. And to fully trust God means to surrender control and let God be God. Let him take the lead, even if he takes us on the long way. Even if we would have gone or preferred another way, we yield to God. We surrender to him. We submit to his leadership. Over the past 2 or 3 weeks, I've had several conversations with different individuals who I would describe as in the wilderness. Now, they didn't necessarily use that word, but as they described their story and the details of their story, it became pretty clear that life is difficult right now, that there's a lot of uncertainty. In fact, what I heard was a couple of themes: disorientation, just so much confusion. I thought I knew how things were. I thought I understood, and now it just seems like everything is so confusing, so uncertain, so turned upside down. That's the nature of the wilderness. But I also heard disappointment, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. That's also the nature of the wilderness. Because we're moved out of comfort, we're moved out of what is known and familiar. And what I think all of us, when we're in the wilderness, we want more than anything else is to get out of the wilderness, right? We want a way out. And when I'm talking to people, that's where my mind goes. I want to hand them a map, right? I want to go to AI and make a map for them. Here, I got a plan for you right here. I had to do a little bit by hand, but here you go. Here's God's plan for you. I even talk about next steps, in a very practical way. Okay, what can we do? What can you do? What does God want you to do? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I wonder sometimes. I wonder if the message that I need to be hearing myself and sharing with others sometimes is this, the same message that Moses shared with the Israelites. And that is, hey, God's fighting for you. The Lord is fighting for you. What you need to do is be still. Be still. And be still doesn't mean be passive. It doesn't mean be indifferent, be apathetic. It means stop trying to control and surrender to God. Surrender to what He wants you to see, what He wants you to do, who He wants you to be, and is trying to make you into. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. So if you find yourself in the wilderness today, or if you're coming out of the wilderness, or for some of us, maybe we're about to step into it. By the way, do you remember how Jesus got there? The Spirit of God led him there. Whatever takes you into the wilderness, don't lose sight that God has not abandoned you. You're not stuck. You're not alone. He's with you. And He wants to reveal some things to you, I believe. And not just reveal these things, but as you see things differently, He wants to remake you from the inside out. Will you let Him do that? It means letting go. And that's scary, isn't it? Surrendering control. That is so frightening. Will you do that? Will you surrender to Him? Will you trust Him to do what God does? He redeems, He restores, He renews. That's what He wants to do in your life. I believe that. I hope you do too. If we can encourage you, pray for you, let us do that. A couple of our shepherds and their wives will be in the parlor, a room right behind the stage area. As we stand up in just a minute, you can go there and see them. They'll pray for you. You can come down to the front. We'll do that as a church family. If today you're ready to surrender your life to Christ, you're tired of being in control of your own life and you want Jesus to be in control, don't wait any longer. Be baptized into Christ. Put on Christ in baptism and live a life that He's made you to live. If we can do something for you today, we invite you to come as we stand and sing. Let's stand together.
'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus.